the numbers are pretty clear. I mean, second half demand is going to be higher. OPEC already has reduced their output, so the gap is going to come up. So gap between supply and demand. Of course, we can say, well, maybe China will not have a recovery that is that strong, and maybe there will be supply coming from the moon or somewhere else, and then this price increase may not be on the cards. That's possible. The highest likelihood that the increase is not going to be that pronounced is from the recession fears in the West. That's really putting a lid on the market.
Did you miss the Chinese data today, Johannes? China's copper imports, for instance, falling 12.5%. I mean, if Dr. Copper's right, then there is no massive recovery happening. The trade data was incredibly underwhelming on imports across the board. The Chinese aren't firing on all cylinders yet, Johannes.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's for the last half a year. The fears about how strong and the hopes of how strong the recovery in China will be was driving the entire spectrum. So we can see that also the demand for transporting goods, manufactured goods from the factories to the ports is relatively slow. We, on the other side, see very strong and robust travel and transport data for the air industry. So it is always a give and take here and there. In general, China is coming from a relatively low numbers, and so the demand increase is going to be strong. But of course, it's not that strong, and that's why OPEC has actually lowered their supply. And it was criticized for that. Everyone was wondering, why is OPEC reducing supply? Well, they were seeing that much earlier than the rest, and that's why they have lowered already some of their supply.
Johannes, it's an important day for the Russians, at least, as they mark the defeat of the Nazis. And obviously this event today has all sorts of connotations as we look at the ongoing Ukraine-Russia war. But let me ask you about the picture that evolves through the rest of the year in terms of Russia's supply into markets. What's your expectation, and will there be any significant change that has a bearing on prices?
Probably no big change, simply because, you see, Russia has announced a 500,000 barrels a day cut. They have done that at a critical moment in springtime when they didn't know how much demand will be there. They also had to do it because they were highly skeptical that they can place all their products, particularly diesel. They are selling more than 1 million barrels a day of diesel, and all that has gone to Europe. And now, they were uncertain this is going to find buyers. Apparently, it has found a lot of buyers, and they're overwhelmed a little bit by their own success on that. Now, you may expect that they will not be able to continue that in the same degree, but by and large, they are finding customers around the world, also because of the price cap that Janet Yellen has proposed, and that was actually making the big change. Last year, the market was driven by uncertainty if the oil sanctions would actually kick in. And that's why prices were up. And with Janet Yellen changing everything with the price cap, they basically undid the price cap. And that's why the market is back to normal. Yes, the supply routes are longer. Oil is traveling to the Middle East and then back to Europe. But in general, the supply chains are working. And that's why that's not having such a big impact.
Well, you brought up the strategic oil reserve. So I think just worth bearing on that for a moment. I know the Republicans are pretty unhappy about the slow pace of refilling of that reserve here, and even forcing an inquiry into the way that the oil reserve is being managed. Is it your expectation that we will continue to see very little movement in terms of additional demand from the US to refill that?
Well, I don't see them to refill it for two reasons. Number one, they don't need to refill it. I mean, they have plenty of production on the one side, which means they don't need to have such high oil reserves. And second, they don't have money right now for that.